Going to be doing Unit 9 Quiz 2 review. So we're going to be looking at the stuff you need to know to take that Unit 9 quiz. So first of all, the first 6 questions ask you to find the excluded value. So to find the excluded value, what you need to do is take whatever's in the denominator and say, okay, this cannot be equal to 0. So for example, n minus 2 cannot be equal to 0. So we're going to go through and solve this for m like we normally would. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides. So when I get that m cannot be 2. So that's all you have to do because numbers 1 through 6 are just asking you to find the excluded values. So again, on number 2, taking that denominator, and we're saying, okay, that cannot be equal to 0. So to solve for x, we need to divide both sides by 4. And 0 divided by 4 is 0. So we're going to exclude the value of 0 because that's what's going to make the denominator 0. Taking a look at number 3, so we see that we have 2 factors on the bottom, which really we're going to be doing the same thing. So what we're saying is, okay, x minus 6 and x minus 7 cannot be equal to 0. So that means that x minus 6 cannot be equal to 0, as well as x minus 7 cannot be equal to 0, and we're going to solve each of those equations. So we're going to go ahead and add 6 to both sides, and I'm saying, okay, x cannot be equal to 6. Here, we're going to go ahead and add 7 to both sides, and we're saying, okay, x cannot be equal to 7. So these two are each of my excluded values for number 3. So I do need to have both. Taking a look at number 4. For number 4, we're saying that 2x minus 4 times 3x plus 15 cannot be equal to 0. So that means 2x minus 4 cannot be equal to 0, and 3x plus 15 cannot be equal to 0. So then we're going to add 4 to both sides, and we get 2x is equal to 4. So that 2 is being multiplied by the x. So we're going to go ahead and divide both sides by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. So that's one of our values that we need to have excluded. Taking a look at this other one, we're going to go ahead and subtract 15 from both sides, and then we get 3x is not equal to a negative 15. Divide both sides by 3, and then we get that x is not equal to a negative 5. So that's my final answer for number 4, both of those. So let's take a look at number 5. So now we are looking at this x squared plus 7x plus 12, and we don't want that to be 0. So in order to figure out what we need to do, we're going to go ahead and set up the x. So we're multiplying to 12 and adding to 7. So in order to do that, we're going to do 3 and 4. So we're going to use that now to make our factors. So I notice that the 1 in front of the x squared is, well, a 1. So that means I can use the easy way factoring, which means I can take the x plus 3 and the x plus 4 and put that directly in to factor. So now we know that each of those factors cannot be equal to 0. So I'm going to take each factor separately and set it to not equal 0. So here, subtract 3 from both sides, and then you end up getting x is not equal to a negative 3. Here, subtract 4 from both sides, and then we get that x is not equal to a negative 4. So each of these end up being our excluded values. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at number 6. So what we're going to do on number 6 is we have x squared plus 8x plus 7 is not equal to 0. So then what we need to do is set up our x. So we're going to multiply to 7 and add to 8. So that's going to be 7 and 1. Again, we have a 1 out front here, which means we can immediately put it in to factored form. So then x plus 7 is not equal to 0, and x plus 1 is not equal to 0. So then what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, we're going to subtract 7 from both sides, and we get that x is not equal to negative 7. Here, subtract 1 from both sides, and we get that x is not equal to negative 1. So those are our final answers for number 6. Now, let's take a look at number 7. So for number 7, we have 7a squared divided by a to the 5th. Well, let's start by finding our excluded value. So a to the 5th cannot be equal to 0. So a to the fifth is the same as a times a times a times a times a. Well, the only way a multiplied by itself a bunch of times is going to be 0 is if a itself is equal to 0. So we know that a cannot be equal to 0. That's our excluded value. But notice for the directions on number 7 that we are asked to simplify it as well. So I have 5a squared divided by a to the fifth. So when I do that, I notice that my larger amount of a's are on the bottom. So we're going to subtract those exponents and I get a to the third. Well, a to the third needs to be on the bottom. And the 5 is going to stay up top, even though I moved that a to the third to the bottom. Well, let's start by taking a look at the excluded value of number 8. So we know that 75y to the third cannot equal 0. Well, 75 is not going to equal 0. So we need to think of what values of y are going to make that equal to 0. Well, y to the third is the same as y times y times y. So the only way y to the third is going to be 0 is if y itself is equal to 0. So that's our excluded value. So now we need to reduce this and simplify it. So first of all, I want to reduce that fraction. So I have 25 divided by 75. So I need to think what divides 25 and 75. Well, actually, 25 divides both of them. So what I end up getting is 1 over 3. X to the third, there's no x on the bottom at all. So that means that my x to the third is going to stay as is on top. And then I notice I have y to the 7th divided by y to the 3rd. So I'm going to subtract those exponents and I get 4. Larger amount of y's are on the top, so my y to the 4th is going to go on top. Now you don't have to write out that 1. Your answer could look like this, but if you write out that 1, that's okay as well. Let's take a look at number 9. So here we can simplify, but before I simplify, I always like to take a look at the excluded values, okay? So x plus 5 and x minus 9 cannot equal 0. So x plus 5 cannot equal 0, and likewise x minus 9 cannot equal 0. So here, subtract 5 from both sides, and you get that x cannot be negative 5. Here, add 9 to both sides, and you get that x cannot be 9. So those are your excluded values. Now we need to simplify. So I notice that I have x plus 5 on the bottom and x plus 5 on top. So I can cross those out. So I notice that my top goes away completely. So I'm going to write a 1 up top, and then I'm going to do x minus 9 on the bottom. Okay, so that's my simplified version. So for each of these, you should be getting 2 answers, the excluded value and the simplified version. So we're going to do the same with this next one. So we know that x plus 7 times x minus 4 cannot equal 0. So that means that x plus 7 cannot equal 0 and x minus 4 cannot equal 0. So I solve this one and I get x cannot be negative 7. If you're not sure how I got that, definitely make sure you ask me. And x cannot equal 4. So there are your variables. Okay, now let's go ahead and let's take a look at simplifying now that we've got our excluded values. So I can cross off x plus 7 and x plus 7. And left, I have x minus 3 over x minus 4. Okay, so this here is your final answer. You cannot cancel out the x's because of those subtraction signs. So x minus 3 divided by x minus 4 is our final answer. All right, so taking a look at number 11, we need to simplify the bottom. So we need to figure out what our excluded values are going to be. So I know that this right here cannot be equal to 0. So to help me figure that out, I'm going to go ahead and factor. So I'm multiplying to negative 24 and adding to 2. So in order to do that, I need to use 6 and negative 4. So those are going to be my factors on the bottom. And those cannot be equal to 0. So x plus 6 cannot be equal to 0. X minus 4 cannot be equal to 0. So here we get x is equal to, or not equal to, sorry, a negative 6, and x is not equal to 4. So those are my excluded values. Okay, so now I'm going to take my original factored form and I'm going to use that to replace the bottom and I'm going to rewrite out the fraction. So I still have x minus 4 on top, but instead of writing x squared plus 2x minus 24, I'm going to write factored form on the bottom, which is x plus 6 times x minus 4. Now when I do that, I can go ahead and cancel out my x minus 4s. So since my top completely canceled out, I'm just left with x plus 6 on the bottom. So this right here is your final answer for number 11. Let's take a look at number 12. So first thing I want to do is simplify out the bottom. So I have x squared plus 7x plus 10, and that cannot be equal to 0. So I'm multiplying to 10 and adding to 7. That's going to be 5 and 2. So I can immediately put that into factored form. And so they cannot be equal to 0. So then I know that x plus 5 cannot be equal to 0, and x plus 2 cannot be equal to 0. So then I can go ahead and subtract 5 from both sides, and I get that x cannot be negative 5. Here, subtract 2 from both sides, and I get that x cannot be negative 2. So right here represent my two excluded values. So now I'm going to do exactly what I did in the previous problem. I'm going to replace this by my factored form. Now what I noticed something interesting about the numerator. Between 2x and 4, I can take out a greatest common factor. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to divide everything by 2. And then I'm going to end up getting x plus 2. Now my denominator I'm going to convert. So if you can't get something to cross out and you factored the bottom completely, check the top for a greatest common factor because that'll happen sometimes. So here you can cross off your x plus 2's and then you get 2 over x plus 5. So that's your final simplified version. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at number 7. So first thing we want to do is factor out the top. So I have x squared minus 49 is equal to 0. So my a is going to be negative 49 and my b is actually going to be 0, okay, because I don't have an x term. So we're multiplying the negative 49 and adding to 0. So that's going to be 7 and 7. So I'm going to go ahead and write that like so. Now I'm going to take each of these and set them so that they don't equal 0. So here, when you subtract 7 from both sides, you get x cannot be negative 7. Here, add 7 to both sides, and you get that x cannot be 7. So these two right here are your excluded values. So now we're going to use this factored form right here to convert our bottom on number 13, or our denominator. Now I notice that on top I have x minus 7. X minus 7 cannot be factored anymore, so I'm going to leave it as is. Then on the bottom, I'm going to have x plus 7 and x minus 7. So my x minus 7s are going to cancel out. So when I get rid of those, I'm left with 1 up top, and then left on the bottom is x plus 7. So this right here is our final answer for number 13. So taking a look at number 14, I see that I have a quadratic in the top and the bottom. So I'm going to have to actually factor both. So let's start by factoring the top. So we're multiplying to negative 35 and adding to negative 2. So that's going to be negative 7 and positive 5. So the factor of the top is x minus 7 and x plus 5. Now, factoring out the bottom, I'm multiplying to a positive 14 and adding to a negative 9. So since I'm multiplying to a positive number and adding to a negative number, both my signs need to be negative, and I'm going to use 7 and negative 2. So I have x minus 7, x minus 2. So I'm going to rewrite this as the denominator and rewrite this as the numerator. So when I do that, I get x minus 7 x plus 5 divided by x minus 7 over x minus 2. So before I cancel anything out, I want to go ahead and get that excluded value. So I'm just going to do that in a different color just for fun. So we're going to say, okay, x minus 7 times x minus 2, that cannot be equal to 0. So that means that x minus 7 cannot be equal to 0 and x minus 2 cannot be equal to 0. So then we're going to add 7 to both sides, and we get that x cannot be 7. Here we're going to add 2 to both sides, and we're going to get that x cannot be 2. So this right here represents your excluded values. Now let's go back up to this version right here. Now that we've gotten our excluded value, we can write out our simplified term. I can cross off x minus 7. And then what I get is x plus 5 on the top and x minus 2 on the bottom. And that's completely simplified. So that concludes your quiz review video, so you are ready for that quiz. Thanks for listening.